keep Amarillo clean. So yes, we're here to ask for just public support and to help keep Amarillo clean. And to ask for more resources, we need more the paper rubbers.
Yeah.
So we're needing more of these, more bags, more gloves, just things that would help us just facilitate. We want to make it easier for others to be able to keep Amarillo clean, and we're asking the city and the public support in order to do that. I don't have any other comments.
Fernando, thank you. Mr. Hooper, does this fall under you? And then in the budget, hopefully, to get whatever we need, right?
Let's take a look at it.
Sure, appreciate it. Yeah, I bet we can help.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I misspoke. Lindsay London provided written comments. So next is Bill Harris. And after Mr. Harris will be Richard Brown.
Good job.
Afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon. My name is Bill Harris. I live in Amarillo. And first of all, thank you for your service. I know you have a huge amount of work to do, and you do it for almost no money. Much appreciated. I'm here today because I love Amarillo, and I know that AEDC is a big part of supporting our economic growth. The overall tone of the last council meeting, which you referred to earlier, Mayor Stanley, really caught my attention and led me to look into a little more detail about the budgeting process. And I hope you can help some of us understand what was behind that conversation. Now, we've been critical of the AEDC staff and board for moving money between line items. And that was all within a budget that had been approved by the city council. Now, we often hear that we want the city to be run like a business, and in my experience, that's very standard practice within businesses and within cities. It became even more confusing when he posted on the website the document that I handed out, which is, which is the letter from the attorney, the city council's attorney, to Mayor Stanley explaining how the city could pay his fees. And it says in paragraph 5, quote, "In a line item transfer within the city at this point if necessary," and so on. And in the next paragraph, it says, quote, "A line item or department level transfer from other areas in the budget could easily fund this agreement," end quote. Now, notably, it doesn't say that that change would have to go back to the city council for a vote, nor that any other action would have to be taken. And that seems to me to be exactly the process that the AEDC did follow. Now, I understand that in some discussions related to that it was, you expressed the desire that they put in place some additional or different guidelines for their approval process, and that they did just that the AEDC board did take action, and I'm glad that they were responsive to you and they've been that cooperative with you. But that doesn't mean that this recent change doesn't change the fact that AEDC's prior action was perfectly legal at the time they took it, and was a reasonable way to do business. And companies that are considering moving operations to Amarillo are very sensitive to any hint of discord between the city council and the AEDC, because they depend on their agreements with the AEDC. And I urge you to resolve this in a way that the AEDC can really continue to do its job like it has done so well for several decades, and especially in the last 3 or 4 years. The AEDC board is a group of dedicated professionals with the highest ethical standards, and they volunteer their valuable time to serve the community. And the AEDC staff is just superb. So please support them. I want this city council to be successful, and the AEDC to be successful. Thank you for your service.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate you. Did you have something? As a statement of fact, Bill, we did at budget increase the legal department's line item budget by $250,000 in order to take care of the Hyde Kelly Law Firm for what we were projecting for the full year. So as a statement of fact, I agree with you. It's important for us to practice what we preach, and we're not looking to implement any rules or regulations that we're not currently following. Thank you, sir.
Richard Brown, and after Mr. Brown, Sam Burnett.
My name's Richard Brown, I live in the city of Amarillo, and I was the chairman of the board of directors of the AEDC when it was first formed. So kind of the oldest guy in the room as far as that goes. In the late 1980s, oil and gas, real estate, banking were all in a bust, and we had no diversification in our economy. We needed help and we needed leadership. The state passed a law that permitted cities on a local option basis to adopt a half-penny sales tax for the specific purpose of promoting economic development. The then city commission, now council, said, let's do this. And then Jack Seisman and I were in charge of raising the money to help publicize what the issue was as it went to a vote of the citizens, where we were asking our citizens to vote to impose a tax on themselves. Surprisingly, it passed. I think I was probably more surprised than anybody, because that seemed very un-Amarillo-like to say, more taxes, please. So we were the second city in Texas to do this, and the first city had already dedicated all their money to one project, so there was no go-by, and we had to figure out what to do with this new thing called AEDC. The council appointed a 5-member board. We were all entrepreneurs. We all had some hand in business, but there was not a single economics major or business development person in the bunch. And we started by, we need to get educated, and we went through hours of instruction by calling on professionals. For example, Excel's predecessor, Southwestern Public Service, had someone on staff, and we sat through an entire afternoon listening to him talk about economic development and what does that mean. Out of all that, we made one very important decision, and that was, we don't really know what we're doing here, and we need a professional staff to navigate this for us. We then conducted a national search, looking for the first director. We found him. We went to the city where he worked. He had a business park that he had developed. We particularly liked that. And we hired him. I think we learned a lot from that first guy, but it took years to get the first business park here because a couple members of the council didn't think that was a good idea. So I applaud your diligence in selecting good leadership to solve for a better Amarillo. However, if you've identified the problem as potholes, I don't think you should take a shovel and go fill the potholes yourself. In the same way, I don't think you need to manage economic development yourself, nor should the AEDC board. That's what the professional staff is for. And some deference to them, some deference to a very long history of success is what I think is justified in this case. I would never suggest you stop and do nothing, but you've got a lot of other things that need to be done as well. And if it's working, let it work.
Appreciate you, Mr. Brown. Thank you.
Sam Burnett, and after Sam will be Teresa Burnett.
My name is Sam Burnett. I am a citizen of Amarillo, Texas, as well as the president of Amarillo Area Transgender Advocacy Group, and I am here to discuss portion 10E of your schedule today, where I am referring to section E, page 7 of 11, and page 8 of 11. The context in which you use the language to be brought up about the explicit acts in public, prohibiting sexually explicit acts in public facilities where minors are present. So if you will refer to SB 12, which was a state bill that was passed in November of 2023, and then it was brought to court in January of 2024, where it was appealed, and it was permanently banned that any law anywhere in Texas could ever use that language against drag queens. So if that is what you're intending to do, I would highly suggest that you go and re-educate yourselves on the laws, because it has been permanently banned in the state. under the First Amendment Constitution. As far as page 8 of 11, section E, I am trying to figure out why a state or city would ever govern how we are legally represented by our biological sex in public. You don't just state in legal matters, you state in public. So are you telling people that they can choose what they're doing with me in public, in my own life? Because that is inappropriate and uncalled for. Nor what you're asking for is for people to start harassing our children, start harassing members of our public. You are supposed to be a board of nonpartisanship that is here for all of our community. There is in no point where you should ever be discussing my sex or my gender that has anything to do with the way that this city runs. I will also refer you to the statistics that just came out on our group of people, which happened over a 4-year period from 2016 to 2020, where they studied 61,000 transgender non-binary individuals across all 50 states, referring to laws just like this one. And in those states where anti-trans laws, they saw suicide rates in our children go up to 72% in ages 13 to 17. I have heard this committee sit here time and time again and worry about our children. If you are worried about our children, then we need to stop this behavior. We need to realize that not only what we're doing in this part of your language, which I don't know why would even be in there, why are we discussing this on a level that's also discussing roadways? Why is this language in there? If you are here for all of our community and you are a nonpartisan city council, then I suggest that, for one, when you make decisions like this, there are not just our nonprofit, there are 4 or 5 other nonprofits in town. I would love to see y'all sit down with educators, with doctors, with mental health professionals before making decisions like this and get educated on these subjects instead of making them a discussion of politicians who does not have a background on this. Thank you for your time.
Sam, we appreciate you being here today. As a statement of fact, this is the appropriate place for this. That's a state legislative request, and these are the items that we're sending to the state to handle that we see locally. So thank you, sir.
Next is Teresa Burnett.
Good afternoon. I am Teresa Burnett and I am in the city of Amarillo. And I am going to be discussing 10E. As constituents of Amarillo, we the people believe that the city council has not represented itself as nonpartisan. I have asked many people on both sides and they have all given the same opinion. The current city council has displayed qualities and has shown partiality towards one party. We ask that you evaluate your behavior while on this council to keep it nonpartisan. The proposed City of Amarillo legislative priorities have elements that are unconstitutional. For example, under traditional gender policies, the City of Amarillo supports state policies that recognize biological sex at birth as the determining factor for gender in all legal, educational, and public settings. However, in the 14th Amendment of the Constitution, Section 1, it states, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or the property without due process of the law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the law. By trying to pass the policy, the City of Amarillo is putting anyone who does not conform to traditional gender roles in mortal danger. When you ask a transgender woman to use the bathroom that aligns with her birth, you are asking her to go into a room full of men who can potentially harm, rape, and or kill her, and it has happened more than you know. If you ask that a transgender male teenager be put in the sport of their birth, you are asking them to be in a locker room full of teenage girls who then again can potentially harm, rape, and or kill them. You are also opening up the opportunity for false allegations to be pressed upon them. Furthermore, a policy that directly targets anyone not conforming to the traditional gender roles can and has caused significant mental health issues. A new study from the Williams Institute of UCLA Law School finds that 81% of transgender adults in the U.S. have thought about suicide. 42% of transgender adults have attempted it, and 56% have engaged in non-suicidal self-injury over their lifetimes. Using this data from the U.S. Transgender Population Health Survey, research examined the prevalence of hazardous drinking, problematic drug use, serious psychological distress, suicidality, and non-suicidal self-injuries between transgender and cisgender adults. Results from this study, which is the first national probability sample of transgender people in the U.S. I'm going to go ahead and skip down to the bottom so that I can finish my thought. As a person who works closely with the queer community, I can assure you that every policy you make that gives permission for people to practice hate and disrespect of our neighbors directly affects the mental and physical health of queer people. If you have any compassion for people who are slightly different than you, then I urge you to rethink these policies. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Mary, that concludes everyone that signed up.
Thank you, Ms. City Secretary. Do I have anyone else here today that would like to offer public comment? Yes, so we'll start here with Mr. Adair.
Thank you. My name is John Adair. I live in Amarillo. And yesterday, my girlfriend and two other ladies had a meeting with staff members. And the topic of their meeting was pornography in our public libraries. And I'd heard about this a couple times before, and I never kind of realized it was as bad as it was. We're not talking about like adult pictures of adults in adult situations. We're talking about comic-styled cartoon books showing people in sexual acts. And the two ladies that met with staff yesterday had a couple requests. Their main request was a separate room with a door on it and a sign that says must be 18 or older to enter. And if we can't do that, a sign on the front door that tells parents there's pornographic material in here, don't let your children wander around. And it's out fairly open where kids can just wander and go look for it if they know it's there. So that's what I had to say about that. The second thing I wanted to talk about is I was going to remind everybody that the average cost of a home in Amarillo is $230,000. And on 10F here, there's talks about giving $625,000 to the EDC to build 2 gateway signs. I don't know if that's build or replace because we already have 2 gateway signs. And $625,000 is a pretty unrealistic number for 2 signs. So I'd like us to reconsider that. And I would like to see it put on a future agenda, the library issue. If we build another room, separate that. I'd like to, something that'll solve the problem. I'd like to see something put on a near future agenda item. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Mr. Fisher, you want to go next? Or are you going to hand it over? Either one's fine.
Okay. Usually it's ladies first, so
Afternoon, Mike.
good afternoon. My name is Mike Fisher. I live in the city. And I'm talking about 10F also. The Amarillo Economic Development Corporation, as you guys know, is a type A, which means enterprise businesses build up our enterprise community, create jobs that manufacture, that export outside the city of Amarillo, that bring a direct benefit back to the city. And that's what the Economic Development Corporation is for type A. We could have chosen type B, and we could have done things like pay for water pipes and streets and signs, because that's what this says. And the gentleman before me said, well, it's happening, just let it happen. Why would we do that? Rules, I don't know how many times you heard me say, rules for everybody. And we got to go by the rules, and especially when it comes to tax dollars. If you have a private business, you can let Joe Blow get away with something if he's contributing $5 million to your bottom line, but that's not your job to do when it involves our tax money. So we shouldn't allow them just to continue, just because that's the way it's been. And this good old boy system channeling this money back to the other guys, to the guys that already have everything, it's got to stop. And I think enforcing the rules is the way to go. Type A EDCs, like I said, are for businesses and not infrastructure. This type of expense, again, we're doing a line item. We're going to move, a sign is infrastructure. A sign is something we've got to maintain. It's not marketing. It's not something that, marketing, we all know what marketing is. And they're going to line item this over to an infrastructure expense. And I don't agree with it. I think you guys should seek Attorney General opinion. And as an example, the city of Odessa and Grand Prairie, they used EDCs to build gateway signs, but they both have type B EDCs. The last thing I want to mention is these stoplights. I mean, you guys saw on the way in here. I mean, they purposely made these lights. I just experienced it, to cause accidents. You got somebody up here that's asking for grant money to improve the problems we're having with traffic, and they caused this problem. A few years ago, they gushed how this new system was gonna make it so easy to travel through this city. I have two businesses, one at each end of this city. One of my employees says, compared to 2 years ago, it takes them 15 minutes longer to get to one business to the other than it did 2 years ago. And coming here on 6th Street, every cross street, I could go through one street, had to stop, one street, had to stop. And then I was like, man, I'm late. I'm gonna gun it. So I gunned it, and I barely made it. And that's why the 3 bad intersections are downtown. And this grant thing, I'd be real careful of that, because I think they're creating situations to qualify for the grants. And I think that's exactly what happened here.
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate you. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, my name is Sylvia Stephens, and I am a citizen of Amarillo. I come to the city council meetings regularly, and I very rarely say anything. But when you get into a subject where you start talking about sex changes and homosexuality and abortion, that is an extremely sensitive subject for me. Now that I've said it's extremely sensitive for me personally, let me address my background real quickly. I have a background very extensive in science. I have 14 years of college, and I have worked as an expert in several different areas. I have over 60 college courses in sociology, psychology, nursing, biology, chemistry, and math alone. So I've taught and done research on the graduate level in chemistry and biology. I am extremely familiar with the human body. As a nurse, I was studying to be a physician. My health would allow me to do that, so I went on and did the graduate level to work toward a PhD. It is impossible to do a sex change on somebody. I'll be happy to discuss that with anybody professionally that want to discuss it with me. And many doctors are selling these people a fantasy and making money off of it. I know for a fact it is impossible because there are too many differences between males and females psychologically and physiologically. Another thing, if they're saying this is supposed to be a free country where we are entitled to believe what we want to believe, then let it be a free country and let us believe what we want to believe. I do not believe, and I know it is impossible to do sex changes. I will not support abortion. I have seen that extensively as a nurse and refuse to participate and be involved in it. I know what happens in that labor and delivery room. I've been there. And so I'm not speaking of somebody who is talking about hearsay. It is a terrible thing, and it is murder. I will not support it, not at all under any circumstances. People ask me all the time, what do you recommend that you do in a case where a woman and her baby's life is in danger? And I say it's what we used to do when I made a decision to study to be a physician. The physician's responsibility is to do everything he or she can to save both the mother and baby's life and nothing else. So that's what I recommend. So, you know, saying that we have to go along with that, if they want to make a decision to live that life, that is their decision. But you will not force it on me. I will not call a woman that's biologically a woman, a man, and I do not want them in the restroom with me, and I do not want them doing those things around me and my children and other people I care about. And we have a right to say that.
Thank you, ma'am. Appreciate you. Mr. Skank, you're next.
James Skanks, living in this city. I'm in reference to the feedback you want on the Amarillo Economic Development Corporation Type A Articles of Incorporation. I want to take you through a little bit of a history lesson right quick. Some people are, like Mr. Simpson, are a lot more familiar with it. Back in the end of around 2008, 9, 10, when we started up a downtown Amarillo Inc. And we were going to set up, this is a history of, we were going to set up this parking garage, convention hotel, and build us a ballpark. It was all just in the talking stages at that time. But then they started deciding at first, you can correct me if you like, Les, but at first there was a drawing that was going to put the ballpark a little bit west of here, over in that warehouse area. That fell on deaf ears. But as y'all were working it out to develop that, we started determining that for some reason the best place to build it would be right here in front of City Hall, and sort of, in my opinion, shoehorn a nice stadium. We certainly have a nice stadium right in there, but there was a problem. They had a Coke property here. The Coke property was sitting there, and something needed to happen. Well, all of a sudden, rumor had it that Coke was fixing to move if we don't help them build something, if we don't redirect them, if we don't help them. They were going to move their distribution to Enid or something like that, move jobs. And so in a protection of those jobs, the AEDC said, well, we'll just go ahead and purchase that property and build y'all a nice place out at the center where it's at now. Or not really, it wasn't a build them at that time, it was, let's use that old windmill thing that didn't work, but Coke didn't want that, so we wanted to build a new state-of-the-art and move their 300 or so jobs out there. The way the situation worked actually made it where they lost jobs because of the technology innovations that have gone on in that industry of distributing things. They could do it more efficiently once they got out there. Side note. So how do we get that? Well, we got that. Then all of a sudden, we had to figure out how to get it back to where the city could own it. But the AEDC just couldn't let them, couldn't sell it to us. And that is I wish Mike was here, because that's a confusing area for me. That moved around in a way that made it where, whoa, that went fast. Did you speed that up on me? Okay, anyway. So anyway, my key deal here is I've always thought that the AEDC should be doing more Type B projects. Because if you do Type A and Type B, which some cities do, they do both, then you'll be able to get help with some of these infrastructure needs that we have. And so in the Articles of Incorporation, it should be leaned on a little bit that we do Type B projects.
Thank you, Mr. Skang. Appreciate you, sir. Do I have anyone else here who'd like to speak? Okay, that concludes public comment. I appreciate everyone for participating in that. We'll slow that clock down next time. Give me Joe. Moving on to our discussion items. Item 8A, do I have anything on the agenda that needs to come off for review, Council? Okay. We're going to move on to item 8B, Fleet Vehicle Leasing Program. We've got an update here from Mr. Hooper. How are you guys coming with that, sir?
Doing really well, and that's what we wanted to bring to you today, was just talk about what's happened since the last time we probably discussed it was in our budget hearings, and we talked about our plan and what we're going to do. So we want to just give you an update, let you know what's happened over the past few weeks, especially with the meetings that we had with D&M Leasing. So to start this presentation, if it'll go to the next slide. Maybe this isn't working, Steph, you may have to. It always helps to turn it on, doesn't it? Yeah. All right, so we had some meetings. We had D&M Leasing come here. They brought representatives from their Atlanta headquarters, also from their Fort Worth regional office. They had the top of their cream of the crop come to visit with us, and we had some right-size meetings with them. Very, very productive meetings that we had with them. During those meetings, we had a goal, and that was to look at our fleet, look what we were using, how we were utilizing it, and how we could possibly utilize it better to save some money, both through efficiency, through downsizing some of our equipment and things like that. As you can see on the list here, we talked about the type of vehicles that we needed for specific job functions, load capacities, how many people that each of these vehicles carry, upfit needs that we would have. When I say upfit, that's like light bars, safety equipment, lift gates, things like that go on the equipment. Safety equipment as well, how many miles per year that we would drive in these vehicles, and the environment that they work in. I want to mention that during those meetings, I think the most impressive thing was we had every department that has something listed that was going to get replaced this year on our plan come. We would have either the directors, assistant directors, some of the supervisors for those departments would come and participate in those visits, and 100% of the time, they had a very positive attitude. They were willing to say, what can we do to make this better? And it was so impressive enough that D&M even complimented us at the end of it and said, we've never seen a city staff act the way that yours did. You were prepared, they were all prepared, they came with all their information, and it made our job really easy for us. So I just want to throw that out there, that I thought that was great, and I think everybody who was in those meetings saw that same thing. I do want to mention that our leasing plan looks like this. This is what we've landed on. We're going to be able to replace about 168 units through the leasing program. That's 95 in the general fund, plus the 20 that we've already leased or are in production right now for the police department. That was the Durangos that we got a few months ago. Went for a total of 115 out of the general fund, 53 units in the enterprise funds, and that includes utilities, drainage utility, also our grant funded programs such as community development and public health. In the past, what we've been able to do, I got here in 2018, and we've just been able to get a handful of vehicles every year because our heavy equipment load is so big. And keep in mind, we're just talking about what we call our white fleet, or this is just our 1 tons and below. We'll get to the heavy equipment as we get on through the discussions later on this year. We'll bring that piece back to you, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But that's a lot, 168. I do want to tell you, just for Laura and I were talking the other day, and she said, we probably need to bring this up, and it's a great idea. We have existing leases that we've been doing for quite a while. We have 7 total leases that we have underway right now. That's for 2 compactors, 3 scrapers, 1 dozer, and 1 grinder, a large grinder that's out there at the landfill, all of this out there. But we just wanted you to know that, so when the numbers come up later, when we see just leasing numbers, these would be included in that, but have not been included in our discussions with D&M Leasing. These are heavy equipment pieces. That compactor right there is $1.5 million to purchase. So it's really, most of every city that has equipment like that is leasing it. So our lease plan looks like this. You can look at the numbers and see how it's, the details are split out. We have our full-size pickups, there's 74 of those. Special equipment, what that means is anything that has a body upfit, such as a service body, lift gate, cranes, etc. And then we have our patrol units that we talked about just a moment ago, the Dodge Durangos, passenger vehicles at 11. And the key to this little chart here is the Mavericks that you see at the bottom. We don't have anything that's small in our fleet. We had a lot of departments that came in and said, yeah, we don't really need a large half-ton pickup or something like that. We could downsize to that and still get our job done efficiently and effectively. So in order to make it in this right-size meeting, to look at all the numbers at the end, those saved us money, not only in the cost of the lease, but it also saves us money in the long run.
better fuel efficiency for a smaller vehicle than the half-ton pickups and so on and so forth. So that was one of the things that cooperative nature that I talked about at the very beginning of the presentation that was very effective in the end. So we'll be getting 33 of these. You'll start seeing some smaller vehicles out on the streets that are doing their work out there. This is just an overall look at the lease plan. 68% is in the general fund, 32% of it is in those other funds we talked about. This is really a pretty good representation of what our fleet looks like anyway. So it's a pretty even distribution of what we're putting out there in the departments. The leasing plan itself, the 168 vehicles plus the 7 already leased in fleet, 175. We have 7 other vehicles other than the 20, and that was the vehicles that are already on the streets now for the Marshal's Office and Office of Emergency Management that you guys approved earlier. But that comes out to about a total of $1.8 million. That's not a hard number. That's a number that will change a little bit because we haven't seen what the pricing is going to look like whenever they open up the order banks. And the way that works is these manufacturers for the vehicles that we've chosen will open up an order bank and they'll say, it's open now for orders, here's what the pricing looks like, and then we go. They know pretty well what this pricing is going to look like, but it is going to fluctuate just a little bit. If we would have outright purchased all this equipment this year, which we wouldn't have been able to do with the budget that we had, it'd be a little over $8 million. So we're putting a lot of vehicles on the streets, which provides better service. We're also going to be saving money on maintenance costs as we do that with some of these age fleet. Most of these that we're replacing are 2014, 2015 models. They are really, really old and have a lot of miles on them. So we look for some great things to come from that. Quick timeline for you. We expect the units to be ordered as those banks open up. That's usually in the fall. That's usually going to be right when one of the banks is already open for the Mavericks. We expect the others to follow pretty soon. We anticipate delivering the first quarter for most of that, except for the vehicles that would have any kind of upfits. It's going to have to go to another outfitter and then come back to us. Funding was approved during the budget process, so what we really are anticipating is that we won't be bringing these back to you. We're not going to just bring these leases back to you as we get them. You kind of already seen the numbers in the budget process. We wanted to give you the update now to show you where we are going, and that would be what we anticipate doing moving forward. We do want to also, did we go past our slide? Was there, the last one is missing. Okay. So we also want to tell you that the reason for the update today is to tell you that the heavy equipment on the other side that we talked about with revenue funding for that, we will be bringing back to you at a future date. We're still crunching the numbers on that. We're still waiting to see what the prices are going to be for trash trucks, heavy equipment, things like that, so that we can put a comprehensive list together. We'll bring that back to you, give you another update, and let you know where we're at with that. Generally, we would be able to issue that debt in February with funding available in March. And we would be able to make our orders. Should we have to make the orders earlier than that, we have a plan that we could address with the council as well. So if you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer that now. Just want to give you a quick update on where we're at.
Questions, council?
Thank you, Doug.
Thank you, Doug.
Yep.
Yeah, Mr. Hooper, great job. Council and your citizens appreciate these efficiencies that you continue to find.
Thank you. Appreciate you.
Next is Mr. Danforth coming forward, facilities update. He's going to run us through, I don't know, 10 projects or so. And I hear it's a quick presentation, but very educational.
Well, not as eloquent of a speaker as Donnie is, so we did a video presentation. So
Not many are, sir.
what you're gonna see is basically what we presented to you about a month and a half ago, where that job was at that time, and then see where you're at currently. You'll see it ties in with what we have for the ribbon cutting today as well. And I know some of you council members have had an opportunity to go to PD and see some of that. So with that being said, we'll go ahead and get it started. So many of the projects that you see represented there, I'll give you an example, that last one, which was the Civic Center, completely redoing the arena floor, new ice, rebuild of the ammonia plant. Currently today, if you was to go over there, the hockey arena is ready to go and ready to play hockey. That was probably one of our more stressful time crunch projects, but it moved along. You did see the Grant Street project, that storm drainage. It's really going to benefit the city as far as mitigating a lot of the flooding issues that we have on 10th and 3rd Street. All of these projects are moving along. You saw that most of those projects are at 85% complete, with the exception of Transformation Park, the cabin community. I would say we're close to 70% on that one right now. Most of these jobs, even from the video, have changed dramatically from that point. So we'll continue to give you the video updates as we move forward, but I appreciate you all showing up for the ribbon cutting out there at the fuel site, seeing the efficiencies that Mr. Hartman pointed out. All of these projects benefit our community greatly. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Questions from Mr. Danforth?
Thank you.
Man, Jerry has two of our favorite phrases, on schedule and under budget. He's got those down. So good job, Jerry. Thank you for everything. Moving forward, move over to item 8D. Discuss and receive some feedback on Type A articles of incorporation. Before we get Mr. Hyde up at the podium, we've been doing a good job every meeting of trying to continue to update the research on the 3-year look back and the review. Neil Gerber is our internal auditor that's working on that. We had it scheduled to bring that forward to you again today to just continue to vet out some of the questions that council brought forward and update the public on where we're at with some of the findings. He is out of town this week and not here. And so last week, he didn't have everything ready for us. And so, Mr. Path, if you don't mind, could you just give us a little bit more background on where we're at with that, and then we'll transition.
Yes, internal audit, they completed their review of the council requested reimbursable items and so expenses, and reports been sent to the city council, and you've also received the supporting documents today as well. So again, we had planned to have a presentation today, but O'Neill had a much well-deserved vacation plan this week, so he's out. And I do feel it's best that O'Neill provide summary and answer those questions, and so we'll have a plan for the next council meeting.
Real good, sir. Just to continue with our commitment of just working out in front of everyone, council is now in possession of those as of like an hour ago, 2 hours ago maybe. We'll review those, redact the private information that needs to be redacted. That'll again come to the public so you guys can see everything we're seeing. And then we'll continue forward with this, and we really feel like we're close to getting all this taken care of and being able to move forward. So, Mr. George Hyde, I know you've got a presentation here. You've worked pretty diligently. If you come forward in making recommendations. Once again, this is discussion only, and we want to hear what you have to say. We want to hear what council has to say, and try to move this forward and see if we can come to a good, solid plan of action.
Okay, first of all, I feel like I'm going to swallow this. I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the feedback I heard from past discussions. The information that I'm providing to you today is going to be mirroring or matching, so to speak, the potential changes that I've identified based on the feedback that I've gotten from council, as well as the state laws. The concern that has been continuing throughout the process is that there have been a number of claims that, well, we had no protocols, we had no policies. Well, and I don't mean any offense to this, but ignorance of the law is no defense. And when you come to public information and public rules, you'll see that there are fiduciary obligations that the Business Organizations Code provides that places the board in a position that they are responsible if they are not doing their job as a board. And that is outlined in our discussion today, as well as the obligations and authorities of how expenditures are made. And so what I want to do is this, I looked, because in one particular provision, I was trying to find legislative history, and I went all the way back to the Industrial Corporation Act of 1979. And Section 33, which we'll talk about under its code now, was part of that initial creation of local government corporation rules. But because there hasn't been any controversies, typically because you are in control of the Economic Development Corporation's board and their expenditures, there isn't case law, because it was something that the legislature has provided and put into the hands of the city council. So, with that being said, some of this is a little bit small, so I apologize in advance. I didn't know how big to make it. But first of all, we are amending and restating Articles of Incorporation of the Amarillo Economic Development Corporation pursuant to Section 501.011 of the Texas Local Government Code, and under the authority provided to the City Council under 501.401 of the same code. There's going to be predominantly three areas of law that I'm going to discuss. Chapter 501, which is the Type A corporate rules for Economic Development Corporation. 504, which is applicable to Type A local government corporations in the manner in which they're created. And then Chapter 22 of the Business Organizations Code, which specifically applies to organizations that are nonprofit corporations in Texas. And so what you'll find is that the Economic Development Corporation is a nonprofit corporation by statutory edict. However, when the rules for a nonprofit corporation conflict with the rules of Chapter 501 or 504, the rules in 501 and 504 trump the rules in the Business Organizations Code. And that's because you've been created a special type of corporation which is funded by tax dollars and controlled by the City Council. So, can I get there? So here, for instance, on the left-hand side of the item is language with regards to what's in the act, and then on the other side, these are the two provisions. I'm sorry, let me do this. It won't let me back up. Oh, not too far. So here I reference 501.011 and 501.401. And so this is one of them where 501.011 and 501.401 are provided in their totality to the City Council and to the public. These are the provisions of law that authorize us to do what we're doing today. And I just wanted to point out under 501.401 is, and I'm going to do this throughout the construct, is that you will see over and over again where the reference of the obligation of this organization to approve projects and expenditures is in more than one place in the code. So here under 501.401, to be the authority of an authorizing unit under this section is limited only by the law of the state on the impairment of contracts entered into by the corporation. So right above that, you'll see that this unit, the City Council, has the authority to terminate the corporation. And so if the City Council chose, and I'm not saying that this is the option for you, it's just an explanation of the law. If the City Council chose to terminate the existence of the corporation, and the corporation had multi-million-dollar incentive programs and other contracts in place, you would not be able to have that termination be effective until all of those contracts were fulfilled or expired. And so that's in order to ensure the contractual support for the other parties who are incentivized to come to you. Now, the articles themselves, under 501.056, this is an example, a simple example, that Chapter 22 of the Business Organizations Code has what you have to create a nonprofit corporation. Here, the contents of a certificate of formation, that's what they call articles now, certificates. So use those interchangeably. So these are the requirements of a certificate of formation for an economic development corporation. So 501056 is that rule. Name of the corporation, corporation is a nonprofit corporation, the duration of corporation, which may be perpetual, the specific purpose for which the corporation is organized and may issue bonds on behalf of the unit, that the corporation has no members and is a non-stock corporation, and 6, which I want to bring up, there's more, but any provision consistent with law for the regulation of the corporation's internal affairs, including any provision required or permitted by this subtitle to be stated in the bylaws. So it's already created that obligation of control because the organization that approves the article of formation is the city council. So the provision goes on. It's squeezed. So 7 through 10 go on and say street address of the corporation, the number of directors, name and street address of each organizer, and that the unit by resolution specifically authorize the corporation to act on the unit's behalf to further the public purpose stated in the resolution and the certificates of formation. So here it's another example of where the law is foreshadowing the fact that it is doing work on your behalf. And so the fundamental economic development strategies and desires of this council should be the framework from which your economic development corporation works from. So if you want to develop more industrial area, then they should look to that. If there's a type B program that you want to do, which type A can do, you want to call a vote, they should look at preparing those materials as this council ultimately decides is appropriate. So I brought the bylaws up because this is what's key to developing this in the certificate of formation, which are the highlighted items that say, be consistent with state law and with the certificate of formation for the corporation, and be approved by resolution of the governing body of the corporation's authorizing unit. So they can't change their bylaws without your permission. And you create the articles, they can't change their bylaws without you authorizing those bylaws to be approved. So again, it's just another element of oversight that the statutory requirements require this body to do. So Article 1, these are easy. These are materially not changed. Article number 2, it just identifies 50102, defines a type A corporation, and then 50152, that it's a non-member, non-stock form of corporation. So these are checking those boxes off. This is the legislative findings and construction of the subtitle. And so we use the legislative findings that find that economic development corporations are necessary to provide your basis for your authority in the legislature finds portion. So these portions of the legislative finding and construction subtitle are used to create your articles of incorporation. Here, the powers, general powers, privileges, and functions of the organization. So as you can see, what we're doing is we're just taking the language out of the state law, and then we're putting it into an applied language in your articles of incorporation. And one of the reasons why this is so important is that you don't have people that are generally in the Chapter 22 of the Business Organizations Code or understand the Economic Development Corporation's rules under the Local Government Code on your board. So how are they supposed to know? And if they don't have this in their face, if it's not something they have to read upon being appointed to the board, then they're not going to know unless they independently know from some other experience that they have a fiduciary, that the board has these certain responsibilities. And so by putting this into the Articles of Incorporation and ensuring that anyone that goes onto your board gets a copy of the Articles of Incorporation and the bylaws, it then provides them with all the information necessary for them to be able to perform properly under the law and perform their obligations. Without that, what you have is a lot of misunderstanding. The way it's always been may not necessarily be legal. And as I started at the beginning, we have to be careful that we don't let that go into a position where then there's more a significant fault. So, Article 2, Article 3, the duration. It talks about the alteration and termination by authorizing unit, 501-401, 501-402, termination of corporation on completion of purpose. If the board of directors find that all of their work is done, then they can terminate or file authorize a unit can terminate the corporation. And then finally, 405, effective issuance of certificate evidencing file of certification. That's the provision that also identifies the existence and on the issuance of certification evidencing the filing of the certificate of termination and its exceptions. So again, we take one part and we provide you with the state law that supports it. Now, Article 4, we go through the purpose and we use the legislative findings in order to develop that purpose. And so it provides the references to each paragraph and the statutory reference beside it. This again is not significantly different than the construction and purpose of the corporation, but what I've done is I've used it to adopt those purposes that the state law allows. And so if you technically broaden those obligations, it may not be found consistent with the act, even though some of those points are allowed. I've actually heard, I think it was one of the first things I heard when I came in here, was about Type A organizations and their ability to work on infrastructure. And based on your public statements today, there's still confusion. And so I'd like to clarify that as an example. So where you find the infrastructure improvement provision in the law is 501.103 of the local government code. And as I stated earlier, 501 applies to Type A local government corporations. But that infrastructure job or that infrastructure program has to be connected to the development of primary jobs, development of industrial type of manufacturing programs. And so, and you have a performance agreement that's set forth in order to have that completed. So, say for example, the city has zoned a particular area for light industrial development. So that's where light industrial development is going to be. And say that it's greenfield. So who wants to buy property to create a building and have it when there's not even infrastructure to it? They don't come. But if you build it, they do come. And so that's what 103 allows, is that you say you can demonstrate that this infrastructure project is going to be for benefit of an industrial use property. Then you can drag the utilities under 501.103 to the project so that it is now project ready for somebody to buy, build, and connect to your utilities and be there. So 501.103 under those circumstances allows for infrastructure projects to be done under Type A organizations. Now, can I just promote, can I repair some of your water or wastewater lines? Only if I have that tie-in that these water and wastewater lines are serving industrial properties. So it has to be limited to those kind of projects. Now, 501.054 is referenced repeatedly. And the reason why is because it touches upon a number of things like your functions and powers and authorities. But also in B2, as it shows, sorry, I get mixed up with all the buttons. Sorry. So 501054 talks about, with respect to a project, they exercise all powers necessary and appropriate to effect the purpose for which the corporation is organized. Again, subject to the control of the governing body. So this isn't just a discussion of expenditure. This means that the entire project is subject to the control of the entire city council. There are other provisions in chapter 504 or in the 400s that talk about, in the event that there's a project that the city council doesn't think that the corporation is properly handling, that it can remove that project and take it on its own for the completion of that project under the Economic Development Corporation's construct. So once again, it's just another example of your oversight responsibilities. So this constituted authority instrumentality provision is something that is interesting. And under 101 of the Texas Civil Private Remedies Code, that's the Tort Claims Act, of which protects the public funds from raid based on claims of certain types of intentional or unintentional negligent acts. So the law in, for purposes of economic development corporations, it has a specific carve-out that says that the Texas Tort Claims Act applies to that. And when you read the beginning of the definitions of the Texas Tort Claims Act, it refers to those that are protected by it as governmental entities. So when I represented the city of Rosenberg, there was a conflict with regards to that issue. And I litigated it all the way up to a decision of the Texas Supreme Court in 2019. And the court looked at the distinctions between this organization having been identified by the legislature as a nonprofit corporation and other organizations like a local government corporation or other types of what appear to be quasi-governmental entities, and said, this one's different and this is why. And so I've had that experience going through this process. And so here you have the language that actually does talk about you have no exercise power of sovereignty, including the power to tax, to try to provide some more understanding about it's not an EDC tax. Actually, what it is it's a city tax that the city collects from the Texas Comptroller. And the Texas Comptroller gets 2% for their troubles. So you get 98% of it. And it all comes down here. And if your tax is 1 cent and the EDC's tax is a half cent, then it's an obligation of your finance department, in accordance with law, to move that half cent, 1/3 of what came down on taxes, to the Economic Development Corporation. And so that's why it's not a governing body. It's not a governmental entity. Now, there are other exceptions: Texas Tort Claims Act, the Texas Open Meetings Act, the Texas Public Information Act, where they're treated like a government entity. But that's because the definitions in those specific laws include them. And so because they include them, it's just not comparing apples to apples when you start comparing an economic development corporation with any other type of organization that is not governed by 501 or 504 and is not governed by Chapter 22 of the Business Organizations Code.
Mr. Hyde, can I
Yes, sir.
draw a line here? I think what I'm hearing you say is very important, and I want to make sure that we are drawing a line which is forcing us to treat this differently. So the money comes to the city as the taxing entity, and the city voted with its constituents that, a half a cent in your example will go for economic development, and that is then entrusted to that corporation. And so the line you're drawing, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that the reason that governmental organization, that corporation does not operate the same as the taxing entity is because of the way the money flows to it. If it was collecting its own taxes, it would have a governmental body that then would be able to exercise all of its own authority. Because the money is collected and comes here, the oversight, responsibility, liability stays here. And that extension needs to operate according to the governmental body that has the oversight responsibility.
Correct. And the whole basis, the fundamental policy behind that legislation is the taxation without representation provision of our constitutional foundings. And so if the funds came to the city and the city just sent the funds over to the Economic Development Corporation and had no other control over those funds, then those funds, those taxpayer dollars would be paid without the ability to have an elected official respond to its citizens about how those monies were spent. And that's why when we get to it, 50107.3A says all expenditures of the organization have to be approved by the city council. But we'll change that. So under Article 5, which is probably the most interesting for today, and I recall, I respond, I want to remind everyone that 501.056 subsection 6 says that you can, in your articles, you may put in provisions consistent with the law for the regulation of the corporation's internal affairs, including any provision required or permitted by this subtitle to be stated in the bylaws. So even if it's something that has to be in the bylaws, you can still include it in your articles of incorporation. And then later on, you'll find that anything in your articles of incorporation are required to be in your bylaws. Your bylaws cannot conflict with your articles. And so this is a mechanism of which you have the ability to exercise your parental, in corporate, parent, and subsidiary, your parental organizational powers to control the organization. So, and I have that down, 22.103. Any bylaw which is inconsistent with or in conflict with any provision of the article of incorporation or void ab initio, as if it never existed. The board of directors must present all programs and expenditures of the corporation to the city council as the corporation's authorizing unit before any expenditure is made and before any corporation is obligated to expend corporate funds. Any obligation to spend corporate funds which was not expressly approved by the city council is void ab initio. The board of directors must consider an act to approve or not approve all expenditures. And that's 50107.3A as well as 22.103, which is specific, that states that the local government corporation as a nonprofit can only act through its governing body. So in order to approve or disapprove an expenditure, that expenditure has to be approved by the governing body, which is the AEDC board, and then that expenditure needs to be approved by the city council. So unfortunately, from your past experiences, state law does not provide a mechanism by which the conduct and actions of the board can be delegated to an employee. And the reason why is that the Business Organizations Code, Chapter 22, places a fiduciary responsibility on every board member to act in the best interest of the organization, subject to being civilly liable for any improper act which they allowed or which they voted for when it was not legal. So we went going into this trying to create mechanisms by which to apply these provisions to the Economic Development Corporation. You see 50107.3A, the corporation's authorizing unit will approve all programs and expenditures of a corporation and annually review any financial statements of the corporation. So those are two distinct obligations in the manner in which the statutory language was made by the legislature. One is approval expenditures and programs, and two, annually review financial statements. Well, the budget is just number one of those financial statements. But this doesn't say that adopting the budget means that all expenditures that are contemplated in that budget are approved, unless you put that expressly, make that comment in the budgeting documents. But you, in addition to approving the budget, have approved that these funds are going to go to these locations by these payees. And we've designed a method by which that can be done. And then the 22-201 provision I just spoke of, the affairs of a corporation are managed by the board of directors. So if you said, okay, I'm going to let the executive director manage this matter of the affairs, that would be inconsistent with state law. And so the way that other economic development corporations typically work, in my experience after 22 years, is your executive director and staff are going to do the groundwork, they negotiate the deals, then they take that information to the board looks at it. If it's something the board's interested in, it goes to the city council. City council, are you in favor of us moving forward on this project? If they give that direction to the Economic Development Corporation, then the corporation finishes the negotiations, brings the project for approval by the board, and then brings it to the city council for approval. And so not having that type of process in place here seems to be a slippery slope to the other problems that we've had. So this was a draft of a document for you to consider. So to obtain approval of an expenditure, the board of directors must be presented the below information. So now I'm talking about the board. That the board, in order for them to carry out their fiduciary obligation, they need to know the purpose, the category, the amount, and the method used to make payment. And so if we know that we're going to spend $300,000 on a credit card, you have the ability to say, no, I don't want that to happen. Or if you do want it to happen, but it's a company card and not an individual personal card, then you have that ability to control that. And then the name of the recipient, either the individual or the company. And if a company, the name of the company's representative involved in the transaction. What that does is the same thing that House Bill 1295 did to you. About 8 years ago, 10 years ago, goes fast, the older you get. But the Senate, it was the Senate bill that the House got right and approved. And what 1395 does is it requires a disclosure of interested persons in the transaction between a local government and a vendor. And so if you find out that the X place one person has 45 relatives that are disclosed that is doing business with the city, then that might be something the public would want to know. And so that's why you have to file those with the Texas Ethics Commission. And my organization's no different, we have to file them too. So it's a very similar type of method, and this really is in your request for that approval.
Mr. Hyde?
Yes,
I was
sir.
going to ask you a question. What's the definition of an expenditure? Tell me what that is.
So the Chapter 501, 073A, does not provide a specific definition to the word expenditure. And what this statutory code of construction requires us to do as lawyers is that we then have to go to the definition, what's called a plain and ordinary meaning. And so you can look at the Webster's or dictionary.com or whatever one, either one of those, and then consider the context of what we're in, and it's to spend money. Okay, it's spend funds.
So based on this, is there a limit? This seems extremely cumbersome for an organization to ask for permission to spend money. Is that up to us to set a limit? It just seems a little cumbersome as far as, like you said, the 501.073, the budget doesn't meet that, right? Just approval of a budget does not meet that. I get that. But then if we say, for every expenditure, if we, define that or interpret that as every expenditure, that seems a little cumbersome. So is it up to us to set the limit of that? I do not want to approve a box of paper clips. I don't want to do it right.
Well,
So-
I'll use that as an example.
Okay.
When we're talking about paper clips, we're talking about office supplies.
Okay, so that's a line item in the budget.
Right. So say line item of the budget says we need $22,000 of office supplies. We're going to buy them from this third-party source. We're going to buy them from this local source, and we're going to buy them from this area. But we're going to need $22,500, and these are the three organizations of which we will spend, I'll buy the money from, or spend the money with, if they have what we need. And that would be the way that they would set up their expenditure request for all of those things that are that. If they want office furniture, that's it. I think we're going to need to replace X amount of office furniture. I need $150,000 to replace office furniture. We're going to get it from edcofficefurniture.com.
So that goes under the line item of office furniture or office supplies.
Right.
But
And they
then
just
the ask
provide
has to
that.
happen. I'm sorry, but the ask has to happen according to this, is what you're saying.
Right, so when they prepare their budget, all they would have to do is attach to it what would typically be seen, at least, so my law firm uses QuickBooks. And if I want to print a report of every expenditure that I made, I set the report, I hit print, and it gives it to me. Well, I can also do that in the CVS mode, which means I can automatically drop it into an Outlook Excel spreadsheet, and then I know where everything went last year.
Okay, I get that. But I mean, we're not going to use your firm because you're not subject to this.
Right.
But in the EDC, do they have to make a request for that? Because you're telling me the budget does not, the line item, that doesn't work.
Right, so out of, well, I'll use your future item on the agenda today with regards to questions that I had on it. There is a proposed resolution, and I can bring it up because it is on the agenda and it relates to decisions, for you to approve $625,000 for 2 mining sites. Okay? And it says specifically in the resolution that they're asking for an increase in the marketing budget. So going back to what the board did and Tom's motion, Councilmember Schiller's motion, you look at it all and say, okay, so marketing is underneath the operating budget. And if, in fact, you approved the entire operating budget, which I don't think was the intent of the council for the comments made, but nevertheless, then what they're asking you for is $625,000 in addition to the $800,000 of which they budgeted. When you look at the backup information and the documents, this was a project of which your Economic Development Corporation knew before they had to prepare their budget and before they had to amend their budget for reconsideration. And so if in fact this $625,000 cost was going to be something that they put in your budget, then they could put $2 million of marketing. 625 is going here, 83 is going here, 105 going here, and they've got it all done.
So the known expenses, they could have done that at the first when the budget was submitted.
Right.
Therefore, the request would not have to occur because underneath marketing, they listed these 8 items.
Right.
So that request would never have to be done because council would have already approved it with those 8 items underneath that category of marketing.
And your resolution that approves their budget would also expressly approve those expenditures identified within the budget documents. And that way you've got the record of the expenditure being approved by the board. I've been and I'm currently in litigation with development issues, multi-million-dollar projects, $25 million type of economic development projects where whether or not the board approved a document is an issue. Whether or not the Economic Development Board project was approved by the City Council is an issue as to whether or not it's a valid contract. And unfortunately, in one case, I've been in court since 2020. I've gone all the way to the Texas Supreme Court, and then they said, well, we want the lower courts to reconsider this issue, so they remanded it back to the trial court to start over. None of the stuff we did for 4 years counted. We're back starting completely over like the suit just got started. And so that's a project that's taking 7 digits to litigate. 4 years, all the way through and back again. And so that's one of those lessons with my experience and my background I can share with the city council as to why my recommendations for these are important. They're important to avoid that experience of which I've had the opportunity since I've represented economic development corporations all over the state.
Okay, well, and I feel like we're getting into some minutia. I mean, and I don't mean to, but I just want clarification on this. So we say office supplies. How specific do they need? I get the marketing, like you made a great point. I mean, there's big items, we know what's going to be there. But we say office supplies, we don't know what those are. How specific, when do we come to the definition of an expenditure? How broad is that category and how can it be used? I just don't want to create something that is just too cumbersome.
Right.
Do you understand what I'm getting at?
Exactly. And so let's go through this real quick. So under 7, the purpose of the expenditure, we need office supplies to work. The category of the expenditure is internal, consumables. The amount of the expenditure. Well, based on last year, we used $25,000 of office supplies. Based on last year, we used these 3 vendors to get our office supplies from. And then E, the method used to make the payment. So we're going to cut a check, we're going to send wires, we're going to use a P card, because here, buying stuff locally, you may be going out there, swiping your P card, get the materials you need for that week, that day. So, and then the name of the recipient, that's the 3 people.
So the request does not have to be made for that expenditure is what you're saying?
No, they have to make that request. $22,500 is going to be used for office supplies.
In the budget?
Right. Well, with the budget.
With the budget.
Right.
So, Mr. Hyde, if I can just make sure, I want to ask the same question, but in a different form.
Okay.
Do you find that it is cumbersome to pre-approve expenditures at the beginning of each fiscal year?
No.
Okay, and once approved, would the additional work in fact be in cost overruns? So we didn't know that we needed another $22,000 in office supplies, so then that one item would be what's coming to council, much like every other project that they work on comes to council?
Correct.
So we would never be in the situation of approving each box of paper clips?
Right. I mean, if they see in the first quarter that they've used 50% of what you've approved, then any reasonable administrator would know that they got to increase that number if they're going to get to the end, unless something's going to change in a month.
In your experience, do multiple taxing entities work like this? And do other EDCs in fact work this way as well?
Yes. The 2 that I currently am involved in, or actually I'm not involved in anymore, is the Utah Economic Development Corporation, which is one of the fastest growing small cities in Texas, as well as the City of Hutto's Economic Development Corporation, Type A and Type B, that also has a similar organization.
I agree with Councilman Tips. We do not want to create something that creates so much paperwork and it's cumbersome and it slows things down. What we want to do is create greater specificity. So much like in any contract, I want to spend some time working out the details. I want line items listed. I want to know where the money's going. I don't want to be so loose and vague that when we look back at the contract, once there's a liability, there's a lawsuit, we can't tell if it was ever approved or not. So if we did say with reasonable certainty, we are creating more work on their expenditures on their budget requests so that we can then approve those expenditures legally and more consistently with state law. And then from there, we would hope that business as usual continues.
Correct. I mean, the one thing that is everyone doesn't like is change. And the one thing that is absolutely positively going to occur is change. And so here, ultimately, once you get through the transition, then last year's presentation is already set up for all of your routine expenditures you had the year before. And if it's not a routine expenditure, and you could also see that if you use 22.5 and that wasn't enough last year, so now this year I'm going to put 35 down. And so then that way it becomes more and more facilitated, more efficient, more effective, and more transparent. And then you know what you're approving, because we don't want to approve $625,000 for a monument sign and it go as a membership fee to another organization.
So let's say that this council found that it'd be E, there's two E's in there, but the second E, let's say that we found that to be the problem. You know, you have to give us the name. You got to say Office Depot instead of Office Max. And so, sorry, you went to Office Max, that's that other count. So if we remove that back and we pull that out, does this council have the ability, the latitude to work through some of these if we didn't need that level of specificity?
Absolutely. I mean, the level of specificity is entirely up to the city council. That's why I stopped at this point and came to the city council for direction, because I thought this was the meat of the things that you wanted to consider.
Do you find it more helpful to continue with the rest of your presentation and come back to this guy, or do you want to go ahead and work this one out with a discussion?
Actually, let me finish Article 5,
okay.
And then some of it may be helpful for the discussion. So 8 is really the how-to provision for Councilmember Tibbs as to what they would do. AEDC's budget will be prepared in a line item format. The line item budget is a detailed list of the various expenses that will be made during a given period. The expenditure is presented separately. The line item budget is necessary to illustrate how much money is anticipated to be spent and what for, and how much revenue is anticipated during a particular period. The adoption of the budget does not approve any expenditure. The budget must be prepared to clearly identify and provide an accurate account of how much money is being planned to be spent and what money is to be spent on, along with the amount of revenue anticipated to be received. C, which is in the wrong spot, no budget line item adjustments are permitted without first documenting proper approval for the adjustments by the Board of Directors and the City Council. The Board of Directors, in its discretion, may submit with its annual line item budget information related to the type and nature of expenditure as listed in paragraph 7, which we just discussed. Initially, financial records of the transaction made in the past 12 months may be used to prepare the expenditure list for the Board of Directors and the City Council's consideration. Any expenditure for existing corporate indebtedness or known anticipated expenses, annual debt payments, contractual incentive payments, personnel costs, or other known and obligated costs which must be included in the annual budget for efficient, effective corporate operation for approval can be approved automatically. But all we need is another sentence in your resolution that says those expenditures identified on pages 5 through 9 are approved. Included in the annual budget will be a finding by the Board of Directors as to whether, after sufficient provision of funds has been made for the full payment of the corporation's expenses, bonds, or other obligations, any net earnings of the corporation subsequently approving exist, and if so, the budget shall include an expense to reflect those funds being paid to the corporation's authorizing unit as required by law. And so this is the one that's next to it, section 50153, corporate nonprofit net earnings. This is one of those provisions that I will look back for specific information on how it was created, but it was actually created in section 33 of the 1979 Industrial Corporation Act. So it's been on the books since this kind of organization was created. What this is, from a policy standpoint, is that when a government body taxes a certain amount of its public and then sits on money and doesn't use it for public purposes and doesn't use it in accordance with the projects and programs they need to use it, then that money is either one, overly taken, you're taking too much money from your citizens to tax, Robin Hood and all that. Or number two is that your economic development corporation is not being creative enough to find projects and incentives of which they can move forward in this process. Now, For instance, I had an economic development corporation that did $32 million of bonds for a large project. And that was a $32 million expense that their $7 million annual income didn't pay each year. So they had an obligation to pay this $25 million. Now, if the next year they had property and they sold it for $25 million and they banked that $25 million and not do anything with it, but they don't owe the expense anymore, all those other funds should go to the city council, for the city's general fund for purposes of use in operations. It should be used for operations. And so that's what this statute provides. And all we did in subsection G is give everyone notice that this is out there. Because I've not, until somebody points this out, and I've been the one pointing it out for a while, economic development corporations don't even know that they have to do that, or that this is a thing. And city councils don't. So it's just another one of those circumstances where we've always done it one way, but the law says something different. So this part is one thing I think you do your board members a disservice if you don't let them know what they're getting into. And when anybody serves as a nonprofit board member, these business organization code chapter 22 provisions apply. And so, because state law says the affairs of the corporation are managed by the board of directors, the director shall discharge the director's duties, including duties as a committee member in good faith, with ordinary care, and in the manner the director reasonably believes to be in the best interest of the corporation. A director who is proven to have not performed these duties to act in good faith, with ordinary care, and in a manner the director reasonably believed to be in the best interest of the corporation, is liable to the corporation. So if board members don't do their duty, then they are responsible to the corporation under civil statute for whatever damages or consequential losses occur. And so the actual statute is right beside it, chapter 22 to 21. And I put this in here because I'm not making it up. I wanted to make sure everyone knew where this language was coming from. And so it has the direct, tit for tat, so to speak, on what laws will be decided. Loans to directors prohibited. And this is kind of the language that I wanted to use for purposes of interpreting. Any director of a corporation who votes for or assents to, so just letting it happen, the making of a loan to a director, and any officer who participates in the making of a loan are jointly and severally liable to the corporation for the loan until the loan is repaid. All information held by the corporation, whether held by any director, employee, or the representative, is accessible to the council member upon request in their official capacity only. So the first part is an example of what type of circumstances could be used to define whether, or challenge whether a board member met their fiduciary responsibility. The second part, number 13, is the 173 or 501.073B provision that says that the books and records of the organization shall be available to the authorizing unit at all times. So what we're doing here is that we're taking in advance, saying if any council member is interested in looking at the books or the records of the AEDC, they can. And so it avoids having to bring the resolution to the city council, have the city council approve that the board has that every board member has that authority, because it's already in the document. So that, again, makes it more transparent, more available for the city council. And 5 done.
Okay. So definitely have a few questions on that. You want to take questions on Article 5?
Sure, however the council wants to take questions.
Well, it's a lot to digest. We're getting close to 5 o'clock. I don't want to push us too far without a recess. But I would like to just pause here for a minute. These are recommendations. we can modify these, we can accept these, we can reject these, right? You know, maybe let's do this before we take a recess. We could go through .053, maybe understand a little bit more of what you're driving at there, make sure we understand what we're looking at, and then probably come back in after the recess, conduct a discussion with further questions. But council, I have a few questions on that one, and I would just open it up from other council for questions for Mr. Hyde on any of this, and then if there are none, I'll address them.
Which one are we talking about going back to?
I'm going to 05. You go ahead, whatever you got.
No, I'll wait a minute.
Anybody else have anything?
Oh, wait.
Okay. I want to know, so EDCs required by law to have reserves, required by law to not carry reserves, like what's the law?
Yeah, the Economic Development Corporation's provisions of state and local government code do not identify a reserve necessary or how much that reserve would be.
So like a municipality, you know, we must keep 90 days reserves in order to stay in good standing, and I think it's even 60 days minimum. But EDCs do not have a reserve requirement.
No, it doesn't. So what that means is it was deferred to this body to, if it so elects, to set a reserve for it, or the bylaws can set a reserve for it.
Do we have anything in the bylaws that you've reviewed that set up a reserve account for the EDC?
I don't recall, but
okay, we can clarify.
Yes.
And then, do you recommend that it's good business practice or best practices to have reserves for EDCs?
I think that a number of circumstances require it. So, for instance, if you did a bond, there may be an amount, even a loan to a bank, they may want to have reserves of 1.5 years of payments, you know, in their bank, in their financial institution. So, yes.
We definitely want to have the healthiest EDC that we can. We believe that by taking this exercise through the articles, we're improving on the overall health and wellness, the future of it, not retracting or restricting that. And would you give a recommendation of what you've seen around the state that is a good reserve?
Well, I think the reserve depends on what your debt load is. I mean, if you have 20 projects out there that you are going to make $1 million incentive every year, then you may need $50 million of the reserve. But if you only have $5 million of projects, then you may not need 50. You may only need 5.
Would it be within your expertise and your scope if we, in having you look at this and work alongside the EDC to develop the pre-approved expenditure list that goes in with their budget request, for you to look at their debt capacity, debt load, and maybe what would be a recommended reserve? And we could also utilize us as the fiscal agent here weighing in on that. I think what I would want to restrict or really kind of shy away from is feeling like, well, 053 says once we pay the penny of the last bill, everything is, and so if we determine, well, we're not reserved appropriately, then we would set that goal and we would move towards it. If we determined we were over-reserved, then we would have a different latitude, I think, in how we would push on 053. In 053, are those monies restricted for economic development?
No.
Okay, why would they not be if the city voted in a half a cent and we've committed to our constituents that we would use that half cent and we go and we use it, but then opportunity is just not there?
Well, it goes back to statutory construction. In the infinite wisdom of our legislature, if they had intended to limit the use of those funds, they would have said so. Because they do in other statutes, they specifically identify how limited funds. So it's because they did not, we're supposed to believe that the legislature intentionally did not put that in that law. And if they didn't put, or if they did put certain words, we're supposed to say that those were the words they intentionally put in. So in this case, the provision that transfers it does not provide.
So if we're running our economic development corporation very well and we're being frugal with the monies, but we're growing as fast as we can, and we were to end up with a finding. So the way this would work is show me what you plan on doing, and then a year later, show me what you did. So that would produce a finding of all the bills have been met, everything has been satisfied, and as an example, let's say there's $1 million of revenues that were unexpected. So, sales taxes were higher than we thought, or we sold a piece of property, whatever it may be. In this new article, 053 would then require the board to make a finding that that $1 million was not needed to satisfy those years. If we had it further, that board would make a finding or a recommendation that it needs to go to reserves. But assuming, and then you can take me back to that, assuming their reserves are adequate, that $1 million could go back to the general fund and could be spent on, an example, say senior citizens, working towards a food program or whatever. It would be unrestricted.
Now, the two things that I want to point out. Number one is, as you said, the board is the one that makes the finding, and the finding is a legislative act. And so in order for anyone to challenge the board's finding, they would have to show that it was arbitrary or capricious. So if I had an organization with $250 million in the bank, they're getting $50 million a year, and they have no projects, then I think it's very apparent that you're being arbitrary and capricious. And so I wanted to point that out. And then the second thing I wanted to point out is this does not also exclude projects that you're under current negotiation and anticipating these projects to hit in your budget year. And so if this hits, we're going to need $10 million fast. So we're going to leave that in our reserve for that project in specific. So those are the two.
Would you make a recommendation with EDCs having to be so forward thinking, and we even have a strategic business plan meeting tomorrow. You're projecting future growth, you're hoping for the windfall, everything coming. Would you look at this in a way where it's not annualized, but maybe you're working at a year behind? So like you would be able to say that your reserves are just adequate. You've paid all your bills, but you have monies left over, and that you would project a good year coming up. So then they would make that recommendation of leave the $1 million here based on future projects.
Sure.
Okay.
And for purposes of that project line item, is that it would be anticipated projects. And if it's $20 million, it's $20 million. Now, that's not approved for those projects because the incentive agreement has to come to council, has to be approved. And at that point, the expenditure to support that contract would be approved in the resolution, and you're good to go.
And everything would be spelled out in the articles, so that moving forward, even though this may seem a little complex now to us because of the way we've kind of been doing business, moving forward, this is going to be very clear and legally defined so that we have less misunderstanding. So, council, I think that gets me where I need to go. Councilman Kraft, did you have something?
Was it the method, you can go more in depth on the method of how it's to be expended? You talk about P cards and credit cards.
Yeah, I mean, that was actually put in because of some feedback from council. The method issue was to, and we may be able to create a blanket exclusion, for instance, that personal credit cards will not be used unless special circumstances, and you got to get those circumstances approved by the board if you're going to get refunded. Stuff like that. And because if it has to come to the board, then you're going to spend the money, you already know you're going to have to be able to legitimately support it because it's going to occur at a public meeting. So it really, in the past when I've used that type of program, it really keeps people in compliance with your rules.
Anything further, Councilman?
No, George, I appreciate you working on this.
We don't have to let you off the hook. We just, I think unless we have another question we want to address now.
Well, he brought up
Go right ahead.
the gateways.
Mm-hmm.
And I just had a question on the gateways. Is that considered a type A payment?
Well, I have to answer that as stated, and my answer is no. It's not a type A project. But they're not bringing a project to you. And that's part of what the other comment I had. If you look at the financials for purposes of payment on this project, it's a combination of marketing and project support, I guess is what they call it. Well, project support relates to a project. This isn't a project, so I don't know the project support money would be appropriate for this. But what economic development corporations do, and the state law does regulate this, that an economic development corporation, whether you're type A or type B, because remember the type A stuff also applies to type Bs too, can use up to 10% of their annual revenue for marketing purposes. And so publicizing and advertising, like paying for billboards and so forth along the freeways is advertising. And so a monument sign, if the board finds it to be advertising, they can spend that money on advertising subject to that arbitrary and capricious word. So I think this is an appropriate expenditure or an authorized expenditure under marketing, not under project support. And it is a legal expenditure of funds for that purpose. But I still have the understanding. So with 2.5 million as their cap, since they have a $25 million revenue source annually, then if $800,000 is in the budget for marketing, and this is $625,000 to go on top of the 800, you've got more than half of their marketing funds expended. And so if this is the only marketing project they currently have, then 625 would be within the 800, and no amendment to the budget would be necessary, or approval of those funds for use. So just the way that it's been presented and the language used, that they're wanting to increase the marketing budget by this amount, it's a little confusing to me.
So to clarify, on this one particular item, you said approval from their board?
Yes.
So they vote on it first, it passes, then we would vote on it?
Right, and that is shown in the document on that item.
That's a legal requirement under state law for an expenditure, just like their budget, overall budget, they're going to vote for it, and they're going to bring it, we're going to approve it along with the expenditure list.
Right.
Okay. Councilman?
So, question, so as I see with the articles of incorporation, you know, and as I read them, not knowing any of the background that you had told us today, I kind of interpreted this, and you say there's really no definition in the law of what programs and expenditures are. So that's something we have to identify what those are.
Well, the courts direct you to the dictionary for a definition of a term that's not defined in the statutes.
But in this case, it would be any money that is spent has to be approved by the board and has to be approved by council.
Yes, sir.
No matter what it's for. Then I guess then my question is the form of which it has to be done. Because I kind of read it to say, well, you approve it in the budget, but everything still has to come back to council again for a second approval.
Well, not everything, but you can do it in corporation with the budget. But in fact, the state law doesn't require you to approve their budget at all. It only requires you to approve expenditures. If you look at 50107.3A, it says you will approve all expenditures and review their financial statements. That's it. There is no approval of a budget required under state law. So it's kind of putting the cart before the horse in that your only obligation, you don't even have to look at a budget if you don't want to. Well, no, you have to look at it, sorry. The law says you have to review it. But you don't have to take action on it. You don't have to do any of that. But when they're going to go write the check, you have to approve it.
But if the budget meets the threshold of information required and we approve it, such as the $20,000 for office supplies.
Correct.
Do they have to come back to us again before they purchase them, or okay?
No.
So the budget approval, as long as it provides the adequate detail that we need, is an approval of the expenditure.
Correct. Absolutely. And
And then, so where do you get into the details of spelling that out more specifically, so everybody is on the same page of knowing, okay, what is the process that we're going to use? Because that's not really spelled out in the Articles of Incorporation. It says how you do it, but it says you have to do it, but it doesn't say how you do this.
Well, if the city council would like, what I've done in one other organization that we adopted forms. And that format was something that was designed in conjunction with and in collaboration with the Economic Development Corporation, so that it met whatever needs they needed based on their method of accounting, as well as meets the level of transparency that I think that the council is looking for here as well. And so we can, instead of having language with required instructions, we can do it like an IRS form. Here's your form and here's the instructions.
And would that be something that you would address in the bylaws, or is that not something associated with bylaws? The more specifics on how you execute on the Articles of Incorporation?
Well, typically this only becomes an issue when there's been an inappropriate use of funds, an unauthorized use of expenditures. And once that happens, then you don't want your corporation, of which you are the parent of, to expend funds that are inconsistent with the law. So you try to do things to provide them more and more notice and self-compliance by doing the type of instructions and form.
And a quick question, just kind of on the history of the EDCs. Do you know why, back when they were established, they were set up the way they are across the state of Texas as, in other words, economic development is not done directly in-house in the city, but it was set up this way. Why was it set up with a separate board, separate staff, kind of a little bit of a detachment, but still connected with the city?
Right. So one is that there is if the Economic Development Corporation is entering into contracts with third parties, it does not trigger the full faith and credit and does not put the taxpayers' dollars at risk. And so that's a big change. Because otherwise, the city council, if there was a $50 million project that went bad and you got a judgment, the taxpayers' money would be at risk. You may have to increase taxes to pay that judgment. With the Economic Development Corporation being a different corporation, the public's tax dollars are safe. Now, the second part of doing it this way is something that I've done with a number of my economic development corporations, is that you have, under Chapter 380 of the local government corporation, the city council has the authority to do incentives. But sometimes when you do incentives with tax dollars, it becomes a significant political issue. So Chapter 380.004 of the local government or the Texas Local Government Code is the provision that says this body, and this is the only reason why you can't say, because 50107 says you can't aid a corporation in any way, shape, or form. The exception is 380.004, and it says for purposes of an incentive, you can give money to an economic development corporation to pay an incentive. And so what that does, what I do, they're called funding agreements. And it's an agreement between the organization, the city, and the EDC that a half-cent of the sales tax from this program, this area, is going to be funded as an incentive to the EDC, because the deal is not just their half-cent, but they want another half-cent. So they want to split 50-50. So the way I do those is that's a contract between the Economic Development Corporation and the city, so that there's only one contract with the incentive function. That way, there's no argument as to these terms mean a different thing than these terms. You're in breach over here, but you're not in breach over here, so we've got to give you the money out here when they're in breach with the city. We avoid all of that by doing it that way, and it also relieves the city council from the, other than the funding agreement, from making those decisions.
And then there are certain expenses that we know we will have, but we may not know the detail of them going